When we're solving quadratics by factoring, there are 3 steps that are important. The first step is that we want to make sure that we have the quadratic equal to 0. So we want to get everything to one side and make one of the sides of the equation equal 0. The second step is that we're going to do the star method. So we're going to do the star method of factoring quadratics. Remember that your star always looks the same way, so it's always an x with a line through the center of it. You'll have your ax on the top at the sides, a times c in the middle, question mark, b, question mark. Your a, b, and c will come from your standard form of a quadratic, which is ax squared plus bx plus c. Once you finish the star method and you've got your 2 sets of parentheses, then your third step will be to set parentheses equal to 0 and then solve for x. So in our first example, we've got x squared minus 3x minus 10 equals 0. So what we want to do first is make sure that it's set equal to 0, which it is. So now we want to do the star method. So our star is going to look like x with a line through the center of it. This is going to be ax on the sides at the top, a times c at the middle at the top, question mark b, and question mark at the bottom. So our a, our b, and our c will come from the problem. We've got x squared minus 3x minus 10 equals 0. So we have to know that our a is 1 because there's an imaginary 1 in front of that x squared. Our b is negative 3 and our c is negative 10. So our ax's will be 1x on the sides. A times c will be 1 times negative 10 or negative 10, and our b is negative 3. So we want to get our magic numbers now, and to do that we have to find 2 numbers that will multiply to give us negative 10, but that will add to give us negative 3. So over on the side, things that multiply to give us negative 10 would be 5 times 2, 1 times 10. I know that in order for it to be a negative, one of my numbers has to be negative when I write down my factors. To figure out which one has to be negative, I look at my b. My b is going to tell me about my bigger number, and it's going to tell me that my bigger number is negative in this case because b is negative 3. So negative 5 and negative 10. The one that will add to give me negative 3 will be negative 5 and 2. So I have negative 5 here and 2 here. I can switch my order. Doesn't matter as long as negative 2 or negative 5 and positive 2 are my magic numbers. So once I have my star filled out, I have to look at the sides, pretend like they're fractions, and see if I can reduce. I cannot reduce 1 over negative 5, so I circle it, and it's going to become part of my answer. And 1 over 2 I can't reduce, so I circle it, and it also will be part of my answer. So my star will be x minus 5 times x plus 2. But notice that whenever we started with the problem, it was set equal to 0. So we need to take our x minus 5 times x plus 2 and set it equal to 0. At this point, we're at step 3, which is to set the parentheses equal to 0. So what we're going to do is split up the parentheses now. So we'll have x minus 5 equals 0 and x plus 2 equals 0. So now we want to solve for x. So that means add 5 to both sides on this one. So we end up with x equals 5. Subtract 2 from both sides on this one. So we end up with x equals negative 2. So our 2 answers are x equals 5 or x equals negative 2. On our second example, we've got 2y squared plus 4 equals 9y. Now, my first step is that I need to make my quadratic equal 0. So in this case, I'm going to have to subtract 9y from both sides. So I end up with 2y squared minus 9y plus 4 equals 0. So now I've dealt with step 1. Now I need to deal with step 2. So that means I need to do the star method on this one. So My star always looks the same. I have AX's on the sides at the top, A times C in the middle at the top, question mark, B, and question mark. I need to know that my A is 2, it's whatever's in front of my y squared, my B is -9, and my C is 4. In this problem, I actually need to change my x's to y's because my problem was in y's. So instead of having AX, I'll have AY on the sides at the top. So now I have 2y on the sides at the top, 2 times 4, which will give me 8 for my A times C, and -9 for my B. Now I need to get my magic numbers, and to do that I need two things that will multiply to give me 8, but that will add to give me -9. So I know that I can have 1 times 8, and I can have 4 times 2. In order for me to get a negative number whenever I add, though, both of my numbers would have to be negative. I know that -1 times -8, negative times a negative is a positive, so I would end up with +8. Same thing with -4 and -2. And if I were to add together -1 and -8, I would get -9. So I have -1 and -8 for my magic numbers. Now I need to see if I can reduce. So I've got 2 over -1. That will not reduce, so I keep it. It's going to be part of my answer. And 2y over -8, that actually will reduce. I can reduce the top and the bottom by 2, or divide by 2. So that means that I would end up with y over -4. So I could get rid of this and use y minus -4 now as part of my answer. So my two sets of parentheses will be 2y minus 1 and y minus 4. Remember, it was set equal to 0 whenever we started, so we set it equal to 0. And then at this point, we need to split up our parentheses. So we have 2y equals 0 and y minus 4 equals 0. We solve, so that means that we need to add 1 to both sides on this one. So we end up with 2y equals 1. Divide both sides by 2. So we end up with y equals 1/2. And over here, we add 4 to both sides. So we end up with y equals 4. So our two answers are y equals 1/2 or y equals 4. Remember that both of them are necessary in order for your answer to be considered correct. Skipping ahead to example 6. Example 6 says an object is thrown upward from the top of a 1,200-foot tall building. The height of the object in feet t seconds after we threw it is h of t equals -16t squared plus 160t plus 1,200. How long does it take the object to hit the ground? So I know since it's a word problem, since I read it once, now I need to get back and I need to highlight the important things. I know that this object is being thrown upward from the top of a 1,200-foot tall building, and that's important. It's definitely important that the height of the object in feet t seconds after we throw it is this, and then we want to know how long does it take the object to hit the ground. So if we're hitting the ground, all right, for one, we know that we have h of t equals -16t squared plus 160t plus 1,200, and we know that h of t represents the height. So this is the height off the ground. Now if it tells us that we're hitting the ground, then that means that our height would have to be, if we were at the ground, our height would be 0. So at this point, now we can solve this problem by factoring because it's set equal to 0. What I see first, though, remember we always have to look for GCF first. So I see that I can divide every single one of these terms by -16. I divided by -16 to get rid of the negative with the t squared. So I end up with -16 on the outside. And then remember that whenever I take the GCF, I divide each one of the terms by my greatest common factor, and whatever's left goes inside the parentheses. So in this case, I'd have t squared because the -16s would cancel. Over here, I'd have 160t divided by -16, so that would be -10t. And over here, 1,200 divided by -16 will give me -75. So now I've got -16 times t squared minus 10t minus 75 equals 0. So all I did was kind of switch around the order a little bit, put that equals 0 at the end. You don't have to do that. I just did it just because that's kind of how I like to look at it. Alright, so at this point I can see that the stuff that's inside the parentheses can still be factored because now the stuff that's inside the parentheses is quadratic. So I can factor the stuff inside. I'm going to make my star over to the side, and I have my AX's on the top at the sides, A times C in the middle at the top, question mark, B, and question mark. My a in this case would be 1. It's whatever's in front of t squared, so there's imaginary 1. My b would be negative 10, and my c would be negative 75. So whenever I plug in those numbers, I'd have 1 x's on the sides at the top, negative 75 at the top. 1 times negative 75, negative 75. My b would be negative 10. So over on the side, I need to make a list of things that multiply to give me negative 75. So I'm going to ignore the negative, just worry about the 75 right now. Well, I know that I have 25 times 3. That will work. I can divide 75 by 5, and I can get 5 times 15. 1 times 75 would also work. So at this point, I need to know that I have to multiply to get a negative, add to get a negative. So if I have to multiply to get a negative, that means that each one of my factors needs to have one negative number. I know that my b is negative 10, so that means my bigger number needs to be negative. So negative 25, negative 15, and negative 75. The only one that will add to give me negative 10 would be 5 and negative 15. So 5 and negative 15. I can't reduce 1 over 5. I can't reduce 1 over negative 15. So now, whenever I have my totally factored answer, it looks like negative 16 times t minus, or plus 5, t minus 15. I need to put brackets around this, or another set of parentheses, so that I know this negative 16 is the greatest common factor, and so it's multiplied by everything inside. At this point, I can take each one of my factors and set them equal to 0. So when I do that, I have negative 16 equals 0, which doesn't mean anything to us. 7 plus 5 equals 0, and t plus 5 equals 0, excuse me, and t minus 15 equals 0. So now I need to solve both sides for t. And I put t minus equals negative 5. And over here, I end up with t equals 15. Now, since t is telling me about my time, t in seconds, I can't have negative time, so that means that I hit the ground after 15 seconds.